Good afternoon. Today's talk will be on K Narayan's novel, The Guide. The Guide is a 1958 novel written in English by the Indian author based on Malgudi, the fictional town of South India. The novel describes the transformation of the protagonist Raju from a tour guide to a spiritual guide and then to a holy man. Now, to have an idea of the plot of the novel, we find that the character Raju stumbles on the guide role because the visitors alighting at the Malgudi railway station find him handy and subject him to an inquisition regarding various tourist resorts. He takes on this role as it allows vent to his pukish genius. The trickster in him enjoys role playing, speaking out long winding introductions about obscure temples and caves, the source of the Sarayu River, for example, and the destruction of the Memphi culture and civilization. He enjoys free rides, good food, and conversation with tourists, along with the challenge, the thrill, and the money it gets him. Although he is essentially indifferent to his clients, he likes this profession because it has found him a voice and some form of a standing in society. Now, Raju is semi literate. He rollicks through life in a casual, non committal way when Rosie appears. He describes her first appearance vis a vis himself, and I quote, he says, "The moment she got down from the train, I wished I had hidden myself somewhere. She was not very glamorous, if that is what you expect, but she did have a figure, a slight and slender one, beautifully fashioned, eyes that sparkled, a complexion not white but dusky, which made her only half visible, as if you saw her through a film of tender coconut juice." Unquote. He is immediately fascinated by her and is self conscious at the arrival of this elegant creature. He runs home at the first opportunity and changes from the old khaki outfit he has always sported as a tourist guide to a dapper, quote unquote, silk jabba and lace dhoti. His casual, nonchalant attitude towards the tourists hitherto is suddenly replaced by newfound fervor with which he conducts Rosie to the Cobra Man and elsewhere. This self consciousness is important as it sets Raju on the road to realizing the hitherto unexplored and unknown dimensions of his personality. He finds himself immensely attracted, in spite of the warning given by his mother and Gafur. He plays comforter, draws out Rosie's tale of an unhappy conjugal life, assuages her hurt feelings by honeyed words. Every little action gets him a step nearer to the inner sanctum, as it were, of Rosie's heart. Seeing her passion for dancing, he fakes an ardent art lover. He encourages her to dance in her hotel room, where a gratified Rosie surrenders to the trickster. When Rosie is left high and dry by her husband, Marco, on the railway platform, she turns to Raju for succor. Always ready for an opportunity to play a role, Raju takes on the role of a savior. With no love or knowledge of dance, he becomes a mentor and inspiration. This role, unlike the other easy and more harmless roles, incurs him the wrath of conventional society at large, and his mother and uncle in particular. The role requires him to grow out of his good boy image and revolt against the shadow masculine uncle, who, he admits, was a terror for him in his childhood. He is either to play Rosie's support, an asylum, or throw her out and be damned in her and in his own eyes. He prefers the former, of course, and valiantly fights for Rosie. In the process of this role playing, he slaughters his uncle, slaughters within quotes, and outgrows his mother fixation, The love of the serpent woman within quotes, Rosie thus transforms the fun-loving Raju into a responsible man who must grow out of the timorousness and indifference with which he encountered life. Raju thereafter steps into the promoter's role. It has already been mentioned earlier that he has no knowledge of the art form at which Rosie is proficient, namely dancing, but armed with the gift of the jab, acquired during his days as a guide, a few right phrases and descriptions about the art and the khadi dress and jacket for impression, Raju begins to meet people and gets Rosie a much needed break. It is worth noting here that although he was attracted to Rosie for obviously his physical needs, Raju transcends this attraction and cultivates through interaction with her a love for a dance. The following lines will show how this trickster begins to be transported to another world, furthering in him the process of transformation. And I quote, when she indicated the lotus with her fingers, he could almost hear the ripple of water around it. She held the performance for nearly an hour. It filled me with the greatest pleasure on earth. I could honestly declare that while I watched her perform, my mind was free for once from all carnal thoughts. I viewed her as a pure abstraction. She could make me forget my surroundings. I sat with open mouthed wonder watching her. Unquote. And now, when he meets people for Rosie's promotion, he speaks with the glibness of a man with a mission, talks fluently on cultural matters, knocking his listeners out by his gusto. There is another quote here. He says, I had picked up a little terminology from Rosie and put it to the best use. I described the dancing feat and explained its significance word by word and almost performed a dance act by myself. Unquote. The trickster once again surmounts all odds against himself, and soon Rosie, who is also known by another name, Nalini in the novel, becomes a household name. As Raju steps into the role of Rosie's manager, he once again performs with the competence and dedication of a professional actor. As Nalini's manager, he throws his weight round, brusquely dismissing the hangers-on, entertaining the moneyed and influential with warmth, chalking out Rosie's programs with meticulous precision, and charging advance money. Thus, he takes the status her image bestows on him in his stride. In his enthusiasm to play a professional manager, Raju begins to overlook her emotional side significantly. She misses the moments of sharing and communion they enjoyed at Raju's old ramshackle railway house colony. Raju, however, hustles her from one place to another, from one stage performance to another, in spite of her protests at reducing her to a caged parrot or a performing monkey. Raju, it is obvious, gets bogged down in the manager-promoter role and neglects sharing. Consequently, in spite of her deep love and devotion, he sees her in projection as a trickster whose love for him is not absolute. It is this that prompts him to react sharply when Marco's photograph appears and Rosie is happy to see it. His inability to understand her prompts him to hide Marco's book and later forge Nolini's signature. He confesses, and I quote, I couldn't understand her. I had an appalling thought that for months and months I had eaten and slept and lived with her without in the least understanding her mind. When the letter arrives mentioning the jewelry box, he reflects, and I quote again, I felt that to show her this letter would be suicidal. She might refuse to do anything except talk about his nobility, or who could say, she might insist on taking the next train to his place, throwing up everything. So essentially, we encounter a lack of trust and emotional understanding and some form of an over-identification with the manager role that make Raju forge her signature. which eventually destroys everything between them. As a sidelight, one might note Raju's behavior in prison. As soon as he is there, where his aggressive authoritarian pose as Nolini's manager does not work, Raju quickly slips into the role of an obsequious do-gooder. He appreciates the needs of the distraught prisoners and treats them with jokes and anecdotes, relieves the water warders and keeps watch in their place, and fawns on the jail superintendent by even removing the pebbles from the ground he treads on. Raju plays here the role of a model prisoner, not because he is made to, but because it satisfies his trickster psyche. He loves to be known, to be seen, and to be talked about. In prison, he cannot get the limelight by being the crook that he really is, but by playing a kind, docile, and helpful creature. Out of prison and still undecided where to go, he meets Velan, a dull-witted rustic, a parallel of the medium in the English teacher, another novel of Narayan. Here the difference is that the psychopomp has a name, Velan takes over from where Rosie left off, Raju sees him in a prospective gullible victim and audience. He deftly drifts into the role Villan gives him as a probable actor would do to fulfill the needs of a responsive audience. He felt like an actor who was always expected to utter the right sentence, quotes Narayan. Later, as he falls into the saint role, he grows his beard and hair. A role to him means an appropriate appearance to go with it. I quote again, a clean shaved, close haired saint was an anomaly and bears the various stages of his makeup with fortitude. The acting and stage imagery is clearly employed here by Narayan to bring out Raju's antics. He plays for the village audience, in turn, their soothsayer, philosopher, doctor, arbitrator, and spiritual guide. Raju thus goes through different and differing life shifting shapes, almost Hermes like, from the little known railway Raju to the immensely popular, self immolating savior saint with the dexterity of an able stage performer. With the passage of time, he cynically begins to see himself as a saint and falls victim a second time to a personal identification. Narayan says, and I quote, he addressed them on all kinds of things. He was hypnotized by his own voice. He felt himself growing in stature as he saw the upturned faces of the children shining in the half light when he spoke. No one was more impressed with the grandeur of the whole thing than Raju himself. Unquote. He accepts their daily visits, deep obeisance, prostrations, and deep faith with the casualness of a saint to the love of his disciples. Their devotion exalts him and compels him to continue playing the role. He is amused at the role the innocent people give him. He cynically observes their devotion to him, but manages to keep his real self aloof from his role playing. However, when drought overtakes the land and the entire village community, perhaps symbolic of the archetypal heroes and parallel of the mysterious forces that wrought the transformation in Krishnan and Jagan, rallies round him and looks up to him for help, he realizes that he has perhaps overplayed his role and that after all the time had come for him to be serious, to attach value to his own words. The drama now begins to enter his real life and he feels the pinch of role playing. He thinks of running away, but the earnestness of Velan and the devotion of the villagers keep him tied to this place. He writhes and quails under the impact of hunger and the immensity of the owners laid on his shoulders, confesses to Velan the truth, as he had earlier done to Rosie that he was no art lover, eats stealthily, but finally succumbs to the role villain has destined for him. Krishnan's initial distrust of the medium's message and Jagan's hesitation before the old man initiates him are comparable here to Raju's plight before Velen, whose faith compels Raju to be true for once to his public image. Raju decides, and I quote, he would not like to cheat them altogether about the fast if he could help it, unquote. Rosie could not fully connect him to the feminine. Where Rosie failed, Velan succeeds. Raju fasts totally, and Narayan says, for the first time in his life, he was making an earnest effort. For the first time, he was learning the thrill of full application outside money and love. For the first time, he was doing a thing in which he was not personally interested. Unquote. The deep faith of the peoples moved him to answer their call with a true and genuine concern. He supplicates to the Mother Archetype in the name of the entire community, surging forwards towards him with deep devotion to bless them and bless the parched earth with rain, symbol of fertility and regeneration. He passes on, but in death there is life for him. Raju thus follows a different trajectory to the feminine, Rosie. He comes to the feminine not through a sustained relationship and its sublimation like Krishna, not through splits like Jagan. He comes to the feminine more through flesh and experience, through delusions and trickery that Rosie incarnates for him. Precisely because he was caught in the lower gyre of passion and infatuation, he needs now the descending force of the feminine, which is symbolized in the descent of the rain in the distant hills. On the surface of it, the novel The Guide seems to make, from the point of view of technique, a departure from Narayan's earlier novels. The narrative is split into two parts. Raju's growing up into a guide and his involvement with Rosie, the complications that follow, and land him in jail form one movement of the story. Raju's coming out of the jail and getting involved in the affairs of Mangala village and his transformation into a saint form the other movement. The two movements are superimposed on each other in the novel and they move forward simultaneously. Narrative in the first is carried on by Raju and in the second by Narayan. This makes a really simple and straightforward story look somewhat complex. The question that a reader may ask while reading this novel, especially in the second part of the novel, is what did Narayan want to achieve by using this form? There was nothing to prevent him from narrating the story himself from beginning to end. Raju's first person narrative and its superimposition on the author's own narrative would easily have been avoided. There was no technical compulsion, as it were, for it, whatever. The only justification for it, perhaps, must be found in the artistic effect that Narayan wanted to achieve by such a mode of narration. The two movements can be studied essentially in contrast. The first one takes Raju through Rosie Marco affair into jail, from where he comes out unchanged, unrepentant, and without any awareness of his true nature. That is why he is ready to play the impostor again when he foresees the possibilities of his new situation, into which he has been placed by villain mistaking him for a saint. Raju takes the decision without any inner struggle at all. In the second movement, however, Raju, caught inescapably into the network of his own creation, moves towards self-awareness and centered. The superimposition of the two movements could have been used to heighten and intensify this contrast. But that is precisely what Narayan does not do. The superimposition is haphazard and without any conscious purpose, as it were, except perhaps the limited one of suspense which comes on off and on in the novel, of keeping the reader guessing at many points in the story. But suspense, as we see in most of his other novels, are seldom important in Narayan, whose stories are generally too much like a day lived in everyday life, with little suspense and more of a routine. The superimposition thus seems largely pointless aesthetically. Coming to Raju's first person narrative, the narrative is obviously in the nature of a confession made under great pressure. Raju, who had all through his life posed as an impostor, is trapped in his own machinations and plans. The only way out for him is to confess that he is no saint. It is through this confession that Raju acquires an awareness of his own true nature. But the confession, far from helping him to escape, finally closes all the doors on him. This brings a decided change in him. On the fourth day of his fast, realizing that he has to go through the ordeal, he, in a vindictive resolution, decides to chase away all thoughts of food. And Narayan says, and I quote, "For the next 10 days I shall eradicate all thoughts of tongue and stomach from my mind." This resolution gave him a peculiar strength. He developed on these lines: if by avoiding food I should help the trees to bloom and the grass to grow, why not do it thoroughly? For the first time in his life, he was making an earnest effort. For the first time, he was learning the thrill of full application, outside money and love. For the first time, he was doing a thing in which he was not personally interested, Narayan says. He felt suddenly so enthusiastic that it gave him a new strength to go through the ordeal. The fourth day of his fast found him quite sprightly. Unquote. Raju is on the verge of a transformation, as we see, of becoming a saint. But Narayan treats the whole thing very lightly. Raju's confession, made under great stress, lacks the emotional intensity of such a confession. We find that his narration is prosaic, too prosaic in fact, and leisurely. In fact, Raju's tone is also no different from Narayan's own. The two voices sometimes appear indistinguishable. It is really Narayan's voice that we effectively hear all the time. Keeping in view Narayan's so-called tragicomic view of life, it might be argued that in the guide we have a story of an unrepentant rogue who is trapped in his own designs, and his becoming a saint in the eyes of the public is one of the overpowering ironies of life. But even this impression is not unmistakable. The whole problem is that at one level, at one moral or thematic level, one fails to grasp Narayan's real purpose in the novel, if at all he had a purpose. Was he seriously trying to show the transformation of a rogue into a saint under the stress of a given situation? Or was he treating the whole subject lightheartedly? We just don't know. He seems to be doing something this and something that, off and on, as the novel progresses, and succeeds only in producing a confusion between tragedy and comedy, which is passed on to us as genuine tragicomedy. Apart from this, there are some other questions which remain unanswered in the novel. For example, we, the readers, do not really understand why Raju fascinates Rosie so much that she becomes his mistress on a second meeting. Further, we do not know why Marco should be so vindictive as to scrutinize Rosie's signatures on the bond so minutely and suspect it to be the work of Raju. We are not sure of that as well. The whole episode of the forgery is quite and perhaps utterly unconvincing. Raju, at the height of his career, is so influential as to be on backslapping terms with the city magistrates and municipal commissioners, yet he cannot get out of this trouble, especially when he has engaged such a famous lawyer. Narayan's treatment of this incident is perhaps quite frivolous to many readers. Once again, it might be argued by some that the novel is to be taken either as a comedy or as a tragicomedy. The fact, however, remains that Raju is a character whom we can't help taking seriously. Narayan, after giving a serious and meaningful dimension to the story, perhaps doesn't live up to completing the character of Raju. Well, the novel, however, is largely free from one otherwise persistent tendency of Narayan, which is to introduce details and episodes that perhaps have no bearing or connection with the story. Except for the earlier two chapters about Raju's childhood and school days, and the later part of the book where Narayan digresses into humorous broadsides on the lawyer and the American journalist, the whole problem of Mangala telegraphists, the whole narrative is closely knit and moves swiftly. This is especially true of the Raju Rusi affair. Narayan's protagonists in the novel strive to better their lot within the status quo framework and aspire to realize their ambitions without prejudice to the existing social fabric. Their dishonest manipulations and corrupt practices, although not sanctioned in the scriptures, are connived at by the permissive department. No protagonist is involved in a major way with the conflict of values or is cogitated with a system which helps in perpetuating the progressive degeneration in life around him. Any crisis, therefore, brewing within the hero is essentially personal. He does not have the perspective to relate his problems to the larger issue of social morality or to the values of human dignity. So these are the issues we have to keep in mind with regard to Narayan's handling of the narrative, as well as the emergence or evolution, if you may call it, of the character of Raju in the poem, in the novel. Sorry. Thank you.